What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So yesterday, a ton of information was released for Nintendo around their most recent fiscal quarter, that covering the holiday period in 2021. And it turns out the Switch is doing pretty well. It actually passed another system that I thought would take a little longer. We'll go over that here today, as well as sales updates for Metroid Dread and Pokemon Legends Arceus. Also, there were a lot of questions from investors to Nintendo about several parts of their business, including their outlook on things like NFTs, the metaverse, and even plans for next generation. Also, we are going to be talking about Gran Turismo 7. There was a full state of play, and this game's looking pretty impressive. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below and ring that notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the uploads here on the channel. And we're gonna start today with Halo Infinite. Now, after the release of Halo Infinite, we had heard that there was going to be a roadmap that would be released showing us what we can expect for about the next year or so, especially with several seasons being planned out. Unfortunately, some pretty key modes have not been part of Halo Infinite, and we were expecting at least them to be there at launch because it's been a staple of the Halo series, that being co-op and Forge. Well, it looks like the roadmap is taking a bit longer than expected. We can see this posted up by Joseph Staten, where he says, "Hey folks, in November, I said we'd have a Halo Infinite update on our seasonal roadmap, co-op and Forge in January. We need more time to finalize our plans, so what we share is something you can rely on. This work is my top priority, and we'll have an update as soon as we can." So it's unfortunate right now because Halo Infinite needs some sort of substantial update. New maps to play on, better events, something, because right now they're kind of cycling through these, I'm gonna say, forgettable events currently, and they seem to be really interested in updating that cosmetic cash shop, which, I mean, that's where the money comes from, so you can kind of understand that. But not having Forge and co-op available at launch, and now it sounds like we're probably going to be towards the end of 2022 before it feels like an actual complete game. So here's hoping they can get that roadmap out here sooner rather than later and give us an idea as to what we have to look forward to this year. Also, we of course had the big news that Sony was buying Bungie for $3.6 billion. It did sound like a lot when that figure was thrown out there. However, we are starting to find out more details around how some of that money is being dispersed. And one, I think, a good idea is this. We can see this posted up by Eurogamer saying Sony will spend $1.2 billion on retaining Bungie staff, saying Sony estimates that approximately a third of the money will be used for deferred payments to employee shareholders conditional upon their continued employment and other retention incentives. So this is much better than when we hear about there being a large acquisition and then a bunch of layoffs follow. And in this case, Sony clearly bought Bungie with the idea of, you guys have a lot of experience, you have plenty of developers who can help us create 10 plus live service games over the next 5 years. So taking that $1.2 billion and I guess dividing it up between employees, let's be real, some will get more than others depending on their more senior positions, anything like that. But the idea here is over the next 4 to 6 years, they would be having that money like split up, and then it'll be part of incentives or bonuses or milestones, anything there. But the idea obviously is to keep them on board with Bungie as they work to create all these live service games. Oh, and there was a Ghostwire Tokyo live stream yesterday. It came in just after the cutoff for this recording, but in the description, it at least did confirm the release date for this game. We can see this where it says Face the Unknown in Ghostwire Tokyo launching March 25th, 2022 on PlayStation 5. They also go on to talk about a deluxe edition, and this will get you a head start on your spirit hunting adventure with 3 days of early access. This, of course, being a very common thing across the industry, where that's probably the real release date, and they just kind of pushed it back 3 days to get some extra money. And I'm hoping this state of play, which will have aired by the time you're seeing this, at least goes over what this game is. That's the biggest criticism I see right now, is people don't really know what to expect from this game. They've shown us some flashes here and there, but nothing like concrete and like, okay, here's what you're doing in the game, here's straight up gameplay, maybe a part of a level, but that's sort of what these state of plays are for. So here's hoping the game looks good and we have another big release to look forward to at the end of March. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Nintendo and their most recent fiscal fiscal quarter because they had a ton of information come out from this, specifically about, of course, sales data around the Switch and some of their games. But let's start with the Switch itself. We can see this over on their investors relations page, which has been updated now to reflect 103.54 million Switch systems that have been shipped, of course, meaning that, yes, Nintendo has gotten their money, at least from retailers and all of this. 766.41 million units of software. Funny enough, if you look at the hardware that's been sold by the Switch and compare it to the Wii U, basically the same, like in terms of the software to hardware. So that means for every game that's sold on the Wii U, there is one Switch out there in the wild, which is mind-blowing stuff to think about there. Also, looking at that software at 766.41 million units, I think this is Nintendo's best shot to get to 1 billion pieces of software sold, something they have never been able to do, even with the DS. Speaking of games, the next one on the list would be the Game Boy at 118.69 million units, and then after that, the PlayStation 4, and then we move up to things like the DS and the PlayStation 2. Now, with this number here, the Switch has become Nintendo's most successful home console to date, that jumping over the Wii at 101.63 million units, and if you look towards Sony, that also jumped over the PlayStation 1. And if you align all systems right now for like their launch dates being the same time and just kind of see how fast they are reaching these different milestones, the Switch is only behind the DS. Other than the DS, it is the fastest selling system ever released. That includes the PlayStation 2 or the Wii or any of that, which is super impressive stuff. But of course, as we talked about the chip shortage and supply issues with Sony yesterday, Nintendo's facing the same thing. If you take a look over on the PDF they released for investors, I mean, you can see when they compare quarter 1 to 3 of fiscal year 2022 to the previous year, they're down quite a bit when it comes to hardware. 18.95 million units compared to 24.1 million units. I didn't think they were going to get to like the crazy number. They got like over 28 million units in that fiscal year 21. But I mean, that's down 21%. And Nintendo did explain this and said, hey, we're trying, like the demand is there. We're not able to create enough systems to meet that demand. Now, they are still sticking with 23 million units, which they actually had to downgrade from 24 million units to close out this fiscal year for 22. But that means they have to sell like another, like 4.5 or so million Switch systems. And that would mean they'd have to have their best fourth quarter ever. So I'm not really sure if they're going to be able to do that or if they're going to have to revise down again when they go over their entire fiscal year. However, when you take a look at their calendar years, this was like the best year Nintendo's really ever had. We can see this posted up by Daniel Med saying Nintendo earnings for quarter 3 fiscal 21-22, that's October-December 2021. The revenue was $6.27 billion plus 9.3% year over year. Operating profit $2.27 billion. That's 10% up year over year. Best quarter ever during the Switch gen. We have a nice little chart there showcasing this. Second best ever. Driven by strong software sales and OLED boost and digital content and subscriptions up 31% year over year. Again, keep an eye on that as it does look like even on Nintendo's side, the digital sales are kind of on their way up, which does make me wonder if Nintendo would take a shot at an all-digital system, maybe with the next gen. Daniel Med also did a nice comparison here between the three companies, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, kind of how they stack up. Microsoft doesn't exactly convey how their operating income is, which makes sense considering that would be like their profits, and like we know the Xbox, that's all over the place right now. But Sony, for example, 2.63 billion operating income. Nintendo at 5.4, despite taking in much less in terms of revenue. Again, though, Sony did launch an entire system with the PS5, and they've been kind of eating some cost on that. But it does show you that the way Nintendo runs things kind of a bit leaner and looks more like internally for their games to be developed. And then, yeah, creating a system that doesn't cost them as much, well, it results in a better profit margin overall. Also, real quick, let's take a look at some of the top selling games for the Switch, as they did update that list as well with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. 43.35 million units. If you take the Wii U version of the game and add it to it, that's over 50 million, by the way. This game sold absolutely ridiculous. Animal Crossing, 37.62 million. I kind of wanted to scroll down here, though, to Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. That game, 13.97 million units. Remember, this ends December 31st for this reporting, which means in less than 2 months, it reached nearly 14 million units. But I know what everyone's wondering, how did Metroid Dread do after it released in October to the end of the year? Came in at 2.74 million copies shipped. It was about 2.3 million that was sold through to consumers. But again, when Nintendo ships those games out, they don't take them back. Trust me, I know this one. So they got their money for that. And I mean, the game being at 2.74 million copies, and the bet with Sean was for the first year, might want to start opening up that Balan Wonderworld now and get that over with. But overall, a very strong holiday quarter for Nintendo, a very strong calendar year for 2021. But I am curious how things will go, as I believe 2022 is going to be very difficult all the way around for Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo when it comes to the chip and supply shortages. So I believe Nintendo will have the Switch end up over like the PS4 by the end of this year, and obviously also eclipsing the Game Boy then too, but I think they're going to have an issue when it comes to forecasting this and coming up with enough parts to be able to put these systems together to meet that demand, but I guess we'll see throughout the year. Next up, let's stick with Nintendo's financials, because they did have some question and answer time with investors, and they asked some interesting questions in there. However, there were two that really stuck out to a lot of people. Let's start with the first one, and that has to do with NFTs and Metaverse. We can see this. These were all collected and posted up by Nintendo Everything. However, David Gibson did go through and translate these on Twitter, which means we should see like official English translations released by Nintendo. So we'll probably circle back around to this just to see if they clean some of this wording up a bit. The question was, how do you think, or what do you think about Metaverse and NFT? Nintendo says, we do have interest in this area. We feel the potential in this area, but we wonder what joy we can provide in this area, and that is the difficult thing to define right now. I want to note, David Gibson came back and mentioned they were mostly talking about Metaverse. NFT was just kind of thrown in there by the investor. However, Nintendo mostly addressing the Metaverse side of the question here, and that's not too surprising, considering if you think about what people define a metaverse as right now, which there's so many definitions of it because no one really knows what a successful metaverse will look like in the future. Just as Meta, they lost like 20 some odd % of their overall market cap in a day. But the idea, I guess, of a metaverse is a place or a virtual world you would go into and basically do your day-to-day life and communication and socialize. Guess what Animal Crossing was? And it's kind of what people turned to during the height of the global pandemic, when people were really staying inside, and it was Animal Crossing was there, and people did a lot of things they would have normally done in terms of socializing with friends, having talk shows, spending time together in this virtual world, this metaverse. And it turned out it was Animal Crossing. So I'm not surprised that Nintendo is like, yeah, the metaverse, that's something we're keeping an eye on, because they kind of already made one, a very basic metaverse, but it still fits the definition. NFTs, who knows there? I mean, we're trying to get Nintendo to do like voice chat and different game invitations and stuff in their basic online setup for their system. But the metaverse, I think, is something Nintendo is at least going to pay attention to. Look, this is the most PR basic answer they could have given to an investor, so they kind of work their way out of it without giving a definitive answer, but I think they're at least paying attention. Now, the other question, David Gibson, who translated it, mentioned that it sounds like they're talking about backwards compatibility. We can see this, where they say, how do you think about the 98 million versus the next console? From Nintendo, into the 6th year of Switch, we are maintaining momentum. We are looking at how to expand and grow this 100 million users leading into next-gen device. Okay, so they're continuing to grow this 100 million users going into the next generation system. That kind of speaks to the idea of we're not going to reset completely. This new device will play these Switch games, the same ones, the cartridge, I assume through your account, which they have shown in investors' relations, like the PDFs they release, that they are building more around this Nintendo account than anything. And it makes sense. I'm sure you want your purchases that you've been making on the Switch now to follow you to the next system. We all assume that's what this big Nintendo account setup has been, is a way to track your purchases throughout generations, not just leave them on the Switch. I mean, for the most part, Nintendo's been pretty good with backwards compatibility. The Wii U, it wasn't going to work. The Switch, completely new concept. It's not taking the discs that the Wii U takes or anything there. But like, if you look at the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Advance to the DS to the 3DS, those all had backwards compatibility in mind, even the Wii to the Wii U or the GameCube to the Wii. So I feel like they're going to stick with this hybrid concept. Sure, we might have an all-digital system where it doesn't take a cartridge and maybe has more storage space or something. Maybe it's cheaper next to a device that would also take the cartridges that you've already purchased on the Switch. It doesn't make sense to still do the hybrid concept and leave all of that behind when Nintendo wants to continue to maintain this 100 million plus install base. Who knows? Maybe Nintendo doesn't even restart a generation. Maybe they just keep doing iteration after iteration, and that's how they make all of this work. Next up, let's talk about Gran Turismo 7. I'm very excited for this game. It's coming out in the first week of March, so we're less than a month away from this game releasing. There was an entire state of play. It was about 30 minutes, and I know simulation racing games don't really click with everyone. In fact, I think most people probably looked at this and said, wow, it looks really good, but I'd rather play a more arcadey racing game, maybe a Need for Speed or a Forza Horizon or something like that. But I was blown away by this presentation, and they went over a lot when it came to the history of just cars in general, the culture around different brands and fan bases for some of these cars. And I mean, really, they showed off like entire history slides and lessons almost that you can go through for this thing. Now, it does look like they're going back to more of their roots when it comes to the career mode and everything there. And yes, menus on top of menus. That was the biggest thing that I saw mentioned online, but if you've been around Gran Turismo, we want more menus. It's gotta be menus, 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 then you're racing, then you're back to the menus. That's how it's always been. Anyway, the visuals are super impressive, and there is a ray tracing mode. It was something that was kind of rumored there for a little while as just, oh, it's just gonna be replays. Well, it looks like you will be able to at least take advantage of the better lighting and depth and all that will present there, but it's gonna hurt the frame rate. And my thing with that is, I'd rather have a high frame rate experience with a racing game like this rather than drop down or it become unstable just so I can have some better lighting. If it's part of replay, I think that's fine because you're just gonna watch this happen. Or of course, showcase mode, which is a big deal too, where you can kind of look around your car and they can just throw all the graphical horsepower at it, because if you're kind of walking around the car and looking at different things at 30 frames per second, not really a big deal. It's more the feel of driving around some of the different curves on the track. Now, the part that really impressed me was the dynamic weather system. It seems like they took kind of what they had with GT Sport and went to the next level completely. They showed off different ways that it will affect your driving, and the biggest thing to me is that different parts of the track will react to like rain depending on if it's sloped in, if there are spots where water can pool up. And as you are racing, especially during these longer events, the water that's on the ground will dry or form depending on if it's raining really hard or if it's really sunny, and that will affect different parts of the track. And that is a really cool way to change things up with what would normally be a pretty basic experience driving around these different tracks. But I'm excited for the game. Check out the state of play. I think it was really cool, some of the stuff they showed off, and obviously the passion that Polyphony has when it comes to creating the next numbered Gran Turismo game. It's been a while since we've had that. I mean, there's GT6 on the PlayStation 3, so looking forward to this one next month. In our last bit of news, let's talk about Pokemon Legends Arceus, as we did get hard numbers for this game in Japan on the sales charts, and turns out it did very well, which is great because typically we'll see two different copies of basically the same Pokemon game release, and that's one of the ways they can sort of inflate those numbers a bit. But Legends Arceus, one copy, and it turns out the only other game that had a bigger opening week in Japan was Animal Crossing, which that's great company to be in. We can see this post up by Famitsu saying that the estimated domestic sales was 1.4 million copies, 1,424,657, placing it ahead of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, which was the one just behind it, 1.396 million pieces. Definitely below Animal Crossing at 1.88 million copies. But I mean, let's face it, Animal Crossing was on fire there after it released, just accumulating tons and tons of copies sold every single week. Great opening for Legends Arceus. And while it's not the traditional Pokemon game, I think seeing these sales certainly woke up Game Freak a bit, and they're like, wow, we can probably have this as an entire series, and we don't need 2 copies. That is the part that I'm really hoping they take away from this, is they can still do really well in terms of units sold without having a diamond and a pearl or a sword and a shield. And that way you get basically all the content there in one copy. So we'll eventually get reports from Nintendo in the next fiscal year when they wrap up the entire fiscal year, and they tell us how many copies this exactly sold. But I'm thinking it's going to be up there. I don't know if it's going to be the best-selling Pokemon game on the Switch, because we see like Sword and Shield continue to roll along, but I think it might end up beating out Diamond and Pearl in the long run, so we'll see more about that in a couple of months. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I asked, are you still playing Halo Infinite? 19% said yes, I still jump on at least a few times a week or more. 30% said no, I moved on or might check back later. And then 51% said no, I never played it in the first place. Well, I figured people would start to kind of get bored of it and move on. Even like myself, I'm looking at it, I'm like, yeah, a lot of the people I was playing with have kind of done that. So I'm sitting there like, all right, I'm Onyx for ranked. I'm 100 on the battle pass. I'm finishing up this event with like the samurai armor and all that. They had attrition, which I thought was a pretty cool mode, but they took it away, so all right, I guess. But that's the biggest thing, is it needs a big update that brings new content to the table. I think if they did some maps, even from older Halo games, just to put them in there and get that rolling, it would at least bring some people back and some excitement to the game. But right now, it's kind of just like flat, just waiting for the next big update. And the fact that the roadmap isn't available yet kind of tells me it's probably going to be a little while. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Master Quake, saying, all of this digital game sales growth over physical is making me shake my head. I will probably stop buying new games and concentrate on retro if physical games go away. I hear this a lot, and I'll see it in comments and stuff where people say, oh, if there's no more physical copies and it's all digital, I'll just go back to retro gaming. I won't buy anything new anymore. But I feel like most people have that game that if it got announced, they would just start rationalizing immediately. And like, it's 2037, so it's 15 years from now, right? And you're watching Nintendo Direct, and then that big game gets announced, and all of a sudden you're thinking, well, you know what? I mean, digital games, it's more convenient. My shelves were getting kind of full. I'm gonna go ahead and pre-order Pikmin 4. Sorry, Pikmin fans. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button, really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Was Nintendo's sales report talking about the Switch actually passing the original PlayStation now, but the chip shortage appears to be kicking in for Nintendo as well. How do you think their 2022 is going to go? And then also, what about Gran Turismo 7 or even Pokemon Legends Arceus reaching over 1.4 million copies sold? Thanks guys for watching. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for Newswave.